Hi, thank you for watching the Microsoft Partner Technology Specialist video series. In today's video, we're going to look at bare metal deployments using Virtual Machine Manager 2012. In this video, we're going to be using a Dell R210 server as a target of our bare metal deployment. To begin, we're going to start by booting our physical server and setting our BIOS and BMC settings. Now that the system is booting, we're going to hit F11 to go into the BIOS manager. Wait for that to continue booting. And then we're going to see the BMC configuration settings pop up. And once we see that, we're going to press Control E to set up our remote access. Those Control E. We're going to make sure that IPMI over LAN is enabled. We're going to come into LAN parameters and set up our IP address and subnet. You'll scroll down here and make sure that we have an IP address, 10.5.40.252 in this case, our subnet mask, and our default gateway are all set up. We're also going to come in and make sure that our domain name, ptslab.net, and host name have already been entered, Jupiter. Exit out of there. We're going to come into System Services, make sure System Services is enabled, and then our LAN user configuration. We're going to come in here. We have by default an account username called root, and we're going to set our root password. Make sure to hold on to that because we're going to need that here in a little while. Okay, we're going to exit the BMC configuration utility and let it continue with the boot menu. Come into System Setup. And it's always a good idea to take a look at your processor settings to make sure that A, you have your virtualization technology enabled, and also your execute disable bit also enabled. Those are both set, so we'll exit out of there. We're going to come into integrated devices, scroll down to our embedded gigabit NIC number 1, make sure that that's enabled with Pixie. And we're also going to change our boot settings so that our boot sequence boots directly to our embedded NIC first. That's already been set. So we're going to press escape there. Escape one more time. Escape out. And let it continue to boot. That's all we have to do to set up our physical server. Now let's look at Virtual Machine Manager and what we need to do there. Okay, now that we're inside Virtual Machine Manager, a couple of things that we need to do to get VMM set up and ready to start deploying images to our hosts. First thing we need to do is make sure that we have Windows Deployment Services enabled. I've already done that here, so there's no need to go back and do that. In Virtual Machine Manager, we'll need to come over to our Fabric tab, right-click on Pixie Servers. We're going to add a Pixie server. Enter the computer name. In this case, SCVMM 2012 is my Pixie server, and we're going to use an existing run as account or enter a username and password that has authority on our SCVMM server. As you can see, that's already been set up there, so we're ready to continue. The next thing that we need to do is to create a Vhd image that we're going to use to provision our hosts. Now, I used one of my other servers, Hyper-V hosts, to create a Windows Server Data Center Edition image, and then used sysprep/generalize to prepare that image. Once that VHD is finished being sysprepped, we're going to add it into our library here under VHDs, and you'll see that the Windows Server Data Center template VHD has already been added here. Now that we've added that VHD into our library, we can continue on with the rest of the setup. The next step in this process is to create a run as account for our baseboard management controller. You'll see that I already have one created here. Let's take a look at the properties. All we have to do is give this run as account a name, so our Dell R210 BMC run as account. Then we're going to enter in the username and password that we set up in our BMC configuration utility earlier. See that that's already created there. Finally, we're going to come into our library and create a host profile for our physical machines. So let's take a look at the host profile that I built here earlier. Let's take a look at the properties. Profile name, Dell R210 profile. Pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. Vhd file, this is the Vhd file that we're actually going to deploy out to our host. If we come over here to hardware configuration, we're going to see that our management NIC is going to get an IP through DHCP. That's fine for our lab. We're going to create a master boot record with that Vhd. And then once that is deployed, we're going to use all the remaining free space on disk. If we come back over here to our General tab, you'll see that the Vhd we're sending to the host is only about 9 gigabytes in size. However, once we deploy it, it's going to expand to take up all the remaining disk space on that server. If there were any additional drivers that we needed to send with that Vhd file, we can actually specify them here. Come on down to our OS configuration tab, and we're going to give it a login credentials for our domain, and I have a domain run as account set up as the administrator. I'm going to enter in the local administrator password here, and then if we wanted to, we can actually deploy it with a product key or other identity information. We've also set up the time zone here to make sure it gets the right time. We're going to come into our host settings. If we were going to store virtual machines actually on this host, we would actually add the path for the Vhd files that we were storing locally. However, since we are going to set this up in a cluster, we're going to leave this blank so that we can actually configure it in our cluster manager to use our shared storage. That's it for our profiles. Now that the initial configuration has been done, let's start the deployment process. We're going to come over here to Fabric. We're going to add a resource into Virtual Machine Manager, Hyper-V hosts and clusters. We're going to choose the option that says physical computer to be provisioned as a virtual machine host. Click Next. Next, we're going to specify the run as account that the baseboard management controller, the BMC, is going to use. Remember, we created that BMC run as account earlier. We're going to click OK. The BMC uses IPMI. Click Next. Next, we're going to enter in the IP address of the BMC that we set up earlier. So that was 10.5.40.252. Click Next while it discovers that BMC. Now that it's discovered the BMC, we're going to choose the host group that we want to place that in. We actually want to add it to our Hyper-V hosts. Alright, and then we're going to obtain the IP addresses and other network settings from DHCP using that host profile that we set up earlier. Here's that Dell R210 host profile. I'm going to click Next. I'm going to give the computer a name. Here we go. Click on Next. Here's our summary. Make sure that everything looks good, and then we're going to click Finish. Alright, so the Jobs tab pops up. Let's expand this out a little bit so we can see what's going on. And you can see the steps that Virtual Machine Manager is actually going to take to provision this new machine. Here we are waiting for the physical machine to pixie boot. So we're going to leave this here and let this run for a little while until we actually, until it finishes deploying this OS. If we flip back over to our host machine, let's come in over here, we can actually see the progress on through the KVM. So we see System Center Virtual Machine Manager has started registering the physical machine to the server. Since we did generalize that VHD, it's going to have to create a new SID for the machine. And then it's going to configure our disk, deploy it to the physical host, and then expand that disk. Once the VHD has been expanded and Virtual Machine Manager goes through the rest of the configuration file, it's going to reboot the server one last time and Hyper-V will be fully up and running. Let's take a look at Virtual Machine Manager and see the process that it's gone through. If we take a look here, we have the create a new host from physical machine task. And here is a list of all the steps that it's taken to complete that task, all the way from formatting the partition disks, transferring the VHD from the Virtual Machine Manager library to the host, converting it down to a fixed VHD, and setting up the boot drive, installing all of the drivers that we didn't actually have any in this deployment, but if there were, you'd see a little bit of a longer completion time there. enabling the Hyper-V role, setting up customization scripts, and then it's going to wait for the physical machine to reboot, install the virtual machine management agent, and refresh the host. And that's all that it takes to deploy a bare metal Hyper-V host from Virtual Machine Manager 2012. Thanks for watching.